Joining us now with a very different view, former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland. Governor, as always, thank you for joining us.
Jim, it's good to be with you.
All right, let's pick up right there. You heard the governor. That's pretty much what he's been saying across the country, that the president deserves no credit, none, for an improving economic picture, particularly here in Ohio. What's your response?
Well, Jim, I would remind Mr. Romney that when Barack Obama became president in the January that he was sworn into office, this country had lost nearly 800,000 jobs in that 1 month. And we had lost hundreds of thousands prior to that. So the president came in at a very critical time. Our economy was careening toward the abyss, I believe, and the president took immediate action. He passed the Recovery Act, which enabled Ohio and other states to keep firefighters and police officers and teachers in the classroom. So then he did something that is hugely important for Ohio, and that's he rescued the American auto industry. When Mitt Romney, quite frankly, said, let Detroit go bankrupt, President Obama intervened, and today in Ohio, there are thousands of people working that would not be working in our auto plants, and especially in the auto supply chain. And so for Mitt Romney to say the president has done nothing to help Ohio's economy, I think is just political mush.
To be nice.
Yeah, to be nice.
You made a Southeast Ohio tour for President Obama recently. Unemployment in some of those counties still very high. I mean, what blame can we lay at the president's feet? I mean, he said 3.5 years ago that unemployment rate needed to be significantly lower than where it is right now. Sure, and he continues to say that the economy is not where it ought to be or where he wants it. But the fact is that we are moving in the right direction. Ohio's economy is coming back. Mitt Romney may not want to acknowledge that. Governor Kasich certainly does. And the fact is that I'm happy about that. I don't really care who gets the credit for it, but I think it's good that Ohioans are seeing an improving economy. Now, you mentioned Southeastern Ohio. Southeastern Ohio is an area that has suffered, well, for decades, for a lot of reasons, geography, topography being one of those reasons, certainly. But in Southeastern Ohio, we are starting to see real economic growth related to the oil and gas industry. And there are communities and counties in Southeastern Ohio and in Southern Ohio that are going to see, I think, a real economic rebound as a result of the use of Ohio's natural resources. I want that done in a responsible way, and I want the local communities and the local landowners to benefit. But I think it's happening, and that's really good news. Some energy presidents, CEOs, suggest that the president is at war with the coal industry. You've heard this. Republicans certainly been on this for the past month, if not longer. How do you respond to that? Well, I think they're flat out wrong. There are 10% more coal miners working in Ohio now than when President Obama came into office. And nationally, I believe there's about 15% more coal miners working than there were. The president has an all-of-the-above energy approach. He knows that we use a lot of energy in America. We certainly use a lot of energy in Ohio. And so we should have the broadest portfolio possible of energy resources. And that includes coal. And that's why the president has been and continues to invest in clean coal technologies. And a lot of that money is being spent at our great universities as this research is ongoing. And that's the future of coal. Jim, we've got, I'm told, about 100 years of coal reserves in this country. And that's really good. And coal is going to continue to be a huge part of our energy needs. But in order to really have a future for coal, we need to do this research and make sure that we can do it as cleanly as possible. But not just coal, oil and gas that's coming out of southeastern Ohio. The wind industry is growing mightily in Ohio. The solar industry is growing in Ohio. Biofuels. Ohio should pursue all energy resources, and I think that's what the president's program does. Governor, you and I have been through a lot of these elections now. We have. And I mean, right? I mean, and there's always that gut feel. Yeah. And I've spent quite a bit of time on college campuses, particularly just recently over here at Ohio State. I mean, there is a reality here. The enthusiasm level for the president by these young voters who still like him, still say they'll vote for him. Yeah. But that enthusiasm level is significantly off. Garfield Institute did this study. The president still leads Mitt Romney among young voters significantly, 50 to 37%. But this next bit of information is more alarming, I would think, to you in the Obama campaign, which is nearly 4 out of 10 young voters believe that he's below expectations. When you look at 2008, he won Ohio with 52% of the vote. If you look at 2012 and you take that enthusiasm away from various groups, it could be very difficult, much more difficult to carry the Buckeye State. How do you interpret this enthusiasm gap?
Well, first of all, I'm happy that both nationally and in Ohio, the president has been able to maintain a small but a consistent lead in the polls, even in the midst of these really difficult economic times. Now, as this campaign unfolds throughout the summer, as we have the conventions and go into the fall campaign, as the contrast is drawn between Mitt Romney, quite frankly, Jim, and I don't want to be overly critical here, but I don't know what Mitt Romney thinks about any important issue, whether it's the choice issue, whether it's equal pay for women, whether it's, the ability of young immigrants to be able to stay in this country, those who were brought here as children, because Mitt Romney changes his position. And I think any objective person would have to admit that it's really hard to know what Mitt Romney really believes and what he will do as president. And this contrast that will be drawn going forward, I think, will renew some of that enthusiasm. But I understand why young people are discouraged. I mean, college tuition has gone up very dramatically.
Student loans.
And student loans. And, you know, the Congress is sitting on its hands right now when the interest rates on student loans could double in just a few days if they don't take action. So, but these students, these young people, will see a clear difference between Governor Romney and President Obama. I think they'll be there for the president.
When you look at the strategy, we look at your last campaign, I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, Democrats, you need a big turnout in Cleveland, Central Ohio. President Obama actually picked off Hamilton County as part of that 52% in 2008. If Rob Portman's on the ticket, one could make, at least on paper, a case that he would help wrap up Hamilton County and Cincinnati, and that could tip the state to Mitt Romney. How do you view Rob Portman?
Well, the only polling that I'm aware of has indicated that Senator Portman would make only the slightest of difference. Now, I've described Rob Portman as a very conservative person with very good manners. And some people took offense at that, but I think that's exactly true. If you look at Senator Portman's record, he consistently votes very conservatively. But he's a guy who is gracious and has really good manners. I sort of thought that was a compliment. Now, whether or not he's on the ticket, I think will be determined relatively soon. But there's something else about Senator Portman that I think is legitimate for consideration, and that's the fact that he was the federal trade representative, and he was the director of the Office of Management and Budget at a time when this country was careening toward what eventually brought us this great recession. So will he help? Probably modestly. But I continue to believe that really doesn't make any difference who the vice presidential candidates are ultimately, that the people choose between the two people running for president.
We're down to less than a minute. You want a rematch with John Casey, don't you? You want to announce that on Capitol Square?
Oh, yeah, you want me to, don't you? I mean, you want me to announce.
As a fact, I was told before we started the interview that of all my guests, you now have had the most appearances on Capitol Square, so you might as well use this platform to just make it official.
Well, I love Capitol Square, and I love ONN. I sort of grew up with ONN, you know? Right. But the fact is that I don't know what I'm going to do, Jim, and that's the honest answer. I continue to be deeply concerned about Ohio and about national politics. I'm engaged with the president's campaign and trying to help Senator Sherrod Brown and Yvette McGee Brown, my appointee to the Ohio Supreme Court. And that's what I'm focusing on. After the November election, I will huddle with some of my friends and my wife and some of my associates, and we'll talk about the future. But I'm not doing that now. All
right, I'm going to pick on you because it made a little bit of blip of news about the tweet. Do you do your own tweets?
Well, sometimes I do, but I didn't do that tweet. I was at the.
Did somebody? Here it is that we're talking about Kent State. I mean, did somebody get in trouble? I hope.
Yeah. Well.
What happened?
This is what happened. We were watching this wonderful game. It was a terrific game between the Reds and the Indians. I was there. And sometime during the game, one of my friends said we ought to send out a tweet letting people know what's going on here, and he did, and it was a mistake. But in the larger scheme of things,
Right.
war and peace, the economy, whether or not people have health care and jobs, this was a little
And I've
deal.
said along, we ought to have a 5-minute window of correction on Twitter. But it is an unforgiving universe.
Yeah, oh, it is, yes.
Governor, always good to see
Hey,
you.
Jed, thanks for having me.
Thanks. See you soon.